She saw him across the street before he saw her. New York hadn't changed, still loud, still indifferent, but something inside Evelyn Carter cracked in that moment. Julian stood outside a small cafe, sleeves rolled up, sunlight catching the edges of his calm expression. He looked whole, not broken, not waiting, not hers. And suddenly, after all these years, she understood something she had spent a lifetime avoiding. She hadn't just walked away from him. She had walked away from the only man who ever truly saw her. The apartment on West 82nd Street always smelled faintly of coffee and cedarwood. Julian liked it that way. Evelyn used to tease him about it, said it made their place feel like a boutique hotel instead of a home. But secretly, she loved it. It was predictable, grounded, safe. At least it used to be. "Are you going to be late again tonight?" Julian asked, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something quieter, harder to name. Evelyn didn't look up from her phone. "Just a client dinner. I told you this." "You said maybe." She sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "Julian, I work in PR. Maybe is basically a guarantee." He nodded slowly, accepting it the way he always did. That was Julian's way he absorbed things. Quietly, without resistance. And for a long time, Evelyn mistook that for weakness. "You've been having a lot of these dinners lately," he said, reaching for his mug. "It's called career growth," she replied, slipping on her heels. "You should try it sometime." The words landed sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Julian just paused for a second. Then he took a sip of his coffee. "I'm proud of you, Ev," he said softly. That was the problem. He was always proud of her, always supportive, always there. And somehow it stopped feeling like enough. The city moved fast. Faster than emotions could keep up. Evelyn thrived in it, networking events, rooftop bars, curated conversations that blurred the line between genuine and strategic. She knew how to play the game. That's where she met Adrian Cole. It was supposed to be just another introduction. "Evelyn Carter," someone said. "Meet Adrian. He's the reason half this room exists." Adrian smiled like he already knew her. "Is that so?" he said, extending his hand. There was something different about him, not just confidence, but certainty. The kind that didn't ask for approval. Evelyn felt it immediately. "I've heard about you," he added. She raised an eyebrow. "Only good things, I hope." He leaned in slightly. "Only interesting things." That should have been the moment she stepped back. Instead, it was the moment everything quietly shifted. Julian noticed the change before he understood it. It was small things at first. Evelyn started checking her phone more often, even during dinner. She laughed at messages she didn't share. She began staying out later, coming home smelling like a different version of herself, perfume layered over something unfamiliar. "You seem busy," he said one night. "I am busy. That's not what I meant." She set her fork down, irritation flickering across her face. "Then say what you mean, Julian." He hesitated. That hesitation, that carefulness used to feel like love. Now it felt like distance. "I miss you," he said simply. The words lingered in the air between them. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt something, guilt, maybe, or recognition. But it passed quickly. "I'm right here," she replied. He nodded. But they both knew that wasn't true. Adrian didn't ask for her time. He assumed it. "You're coming tonight," he texted one afternoon. "No, I have plans," she replied. "Cancel them." She stared at the screen longer than she should have. Then she typed, "Fine." It wasn't about him, that's what she told herself. It was about feeling seen differently. With Julian she was understood. With Adrian she was desired. And somewhere along the line she started confusing the two. Late one night, as she slipped quietly into the apartment, she found Julian sitting in the dark. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier. "You didn't answer your phone," he said. "My battery died." He nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away. "Did it die before or after you decided not to come home?" Evelyn froze. There it was. Not confrontation, but clarity. "I told you it was work." Julian stood up, walking toward her, not aggressively, just present. "I'm not asking where you were," he said. "I'm asking if you're still here." The question hit harder than any accusation. For a second, she didn't know how to respond, because the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. That night they slept on opposite sides of the bed. No argument, no resolution, just silence. And in that silence, something fragile began to break, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet, irreversible way that love sometimes ends, not with betrayal, but with absence. The first time Adrian touched her, it wasn't even intentional, at least that's what Evelyn told herself. It happened in a crowded rooftop lounge in Soho, the kind of place where conversations were louder than music and everyone pretended they weren't watching each other. The skyline shimmered behind them, glass, steel, and ambition stacked into the night. Evelyn stood near the bar, one hand wrapped around a half-finished martini, the other holding her phone like an anchor. She had already texted Julian earlier. "Running late. Don't wait up." He had replied almost instantly, "Okay, be safe." That was it. No questions, no resistance. She slipped her phone back into her clutch just as Adrian appeared beside her, effortless as ever. "You disappear too easily," he said, signaling the bartender without looking. Evelyn smirked faintly. "Maybe you're just not looking hard enough." Adrian turned his head, studying her not casually, not politely, but deliberately. "Oh, I'm looking," he said. The bartender placed 2 glasses in front of them. Adrian slid one toward her. "I didn't order this." "I did." She hesitated, then she took it. They didn't talk about work that night, not really. Adrian spoke about cities he'd built, deals in London, Dubai, Singapore, each story polished, each detail curated. But what pulled Evelyn in wasn't the content. It was the way he spoke, like everything was already his. There was no doubt in him, no hesitation, no quiet pauses where emotions lived. With Julian, silence meant something. With Adrian, silence didn't exist. "You think too much," Adrian said at one point, watching her swirl her drink. "You don't think enough," he smiled. "That's why this works." "This," she echoed. He stepped just a little closer. The crowd shifted around them, bodies brushing past, laughter spilling into the night air, and then his hand briefly touched the small of her back, guiding her aside as someone squeezed through. It lingered. Just a second too long. Evelyn felt it like a spark under her skin. Not love, not even desire, not fully, but awareness. And that was enough. When she got home, the apartment was quiet. Julian had left a light on in the kitchen. He always did that when she came back late. There was a plate on the counter covered neatly with foil. She lifted it. Pasta. Still untouched. A small note sat beside it, written in his careful handwriting, "In case you didn't eat." Evelyn stared at it longer than she expected. Then she placed it back down untouched and walked to the bedroom. Julian was asleep, or pretending to be. She couldn't tell anymore. The messages started the next day. At first they were harmless. "Adrian, you left early." "Evelyn, I had work." "Adrian, you always do." She didn't reply after that, but she read it again and again. Days turned into a rhythm she didn't question. Julian in the mornings, quiet breakfasts, soft conversations, the familiar weight of something steady. Adrian in the evenings, unexpected invitations, sharp banter, the intoxicating feeling of being chosen in a room full of people. "You're different with me," Adrian said one night as they walked along the High Line. Evelyn laughed lightly. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know enough." He stopped walking. So did she. "You don't hold back with me," he continued. "With him, you shrink." The words caught her off guard. "You don't know anything about him. I know he doesn't challenge you." Evelyn crossed her arms, defensive. "Not everything needs to be a challenge." Adrian tilted his head. "No, but the things worth having usually are." For a moment she thought about Julian, about the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he never made her feel small. And suddenly, it felt different. Not comforting, but limiting. The thought unsettled her, so she pushed it away. It happened slowly after that, so slowly she barely noticed when the line disappeared. She started hiding her phone, not consciously, just instinctively, turning it face down, taking it with her, even for the shortest moments. Julian noticed. Of course he did. "You've been smiling at your screen a lot lately," he said one evening. "Work," she replied. "Work makes you smile now." She shrugged. "Sometimes." He studied her for a second too long, but he didn't push. That was his pattern. Observe, absorb, stay quiet. And somehow that silence gave her permission to drift further. One night Adrian invited her to a private event. Something exclusive, something that required a dress she hadn't worn yet. "You'll like it," he said over the phone. "I shouldn't," she replied, standing in front of her closet. "But you will." She closed her eyes briefly. Then she said, "Send me the address." The venue was everything Julian wasn't. Loud, flashy, temporary. People moved like they were part of a performance, not a life. Adrian found her immediately. He always did. "You came," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Evelyn tilted her head. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised," he said softly. I'm right. There it was again, that certainty. It wrapped around her like gravity. Later that night, as they stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city, the distance between them felt intentional, not accidental, not harmless. You're thinking again, Adrian murmured. Maybe. About him, she didn't answer. Adrian stepped closer. This time, when his hand reached for hers, she didn't pull away, not immediately. Her fingers tensed. Her mind flickered Julian's quiet voice, his steady presence, the way he looked at her like she was enough. And then Adrian's thumb brushed against her skin, a different feeling, sharper, more dangerous, more alive. You don't belong in something that makes you hesitate, Adrian said. Evelyn swallowed. And in that moment, small, almost invisible, she made a choice. Not a loud one, not a final one, but a beginning. She didn't pull her hand back. When she returned home that night, Julian was awake, sitting in the same spot as before, waiting. You're late, he said quietly. Yeah, no explanation, no excuse, just a single word. Julian nodded, and something in his expression shifted, not anger, not pain, but awareness. Like he was starting to see a version of the truth he wasn't ready to name yet. Evelyn walked past him without stopping, but as she reached the hallway, his voice followed her. Evelyn, she paused. For a second she thought he might ask the question, the one that would force everything into the light, but he didn't. Instead he said, "Don't forget who you are." Her chest tightened, because the truth was, she already was, and she wasn't sure she wanted to go back. That night she lay awake longer than usual, not because of guilt, but because of anticipation. And somewhere in the quiet space between two lives, Evelyn Carter stopped being loyal. Long before she ever admitted she was unfaithful. The change didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in fragments, subtle, almost polite in the way it avoided being noticed. Like a draft slipping through a closed window, barely felt at first until one day the room was undeniably cold. Julian noticed everything. He just didn't say it out loud. It started with the mornings. Evelyn used to linger, coffee in hand, scrolling lazily through emails, while leaning against the counter, occasionally glancing at him as if sharing a quiet joke only they understood. Now she moved with precision. Wake up, shower, dress, leave. Big day, Julian asked one morning, watching her fasten her watch. They're all big days now, she replied without looking at him. He smiled faintly. That's one way to live. It's the only way if you want to matter. The words hung heavier than she intended. Or maybe exactly as heavy as she meant them to be. Julian nodded, though something inside him recoiled, not at her ambition, but at the way she said it. As if everything else didn't. He started calling her less, not out of indifference, but strategy. At first he had called during her lunch breaks just to check in. How's your day busy? Did you eat? I'll grab something later. Short answers, distracted tone, the sound of another conversation always hovering in the background. Eventually he stopped dialing. Not because he didn't want to hear her voice, but because he already knew what it would sound like. One evening Julian found himself scrolling through her social media. He didn't usually do that. He didn't need to. He lived with her. But lately it felt like that wasn't the same thing anymore. There she was, smiling in a photo he hadn't seen her take. A rooftop, a glass of champagne, a caption that read, "Surround yourself with energy that elevates you." Julian stared at it longer than he should have. Then he checked the tags. Adrian Cole. The name meant nothing to him, yet. But the image lingered the way Evelyn leaned slightly toward him, her expression lighter, freer, different. Julian locked his phone and set it aside. He didn't like the feeling settling in his chest, not jealousy, something quieter, something more dangerous. Recognition. Who's Adrian? The question came out calmly. Too calmly. Evelyn paused mid-step, her coat half on. She turned slowly. What Adrian Cole? Julian repeated. You're in a photo with him. She blinked once, then shrugged. Just someone from work. Just someone, yes, Julian. That's how networking works. He studied her face, not searching for guilt, but for truth. And for the first time he couldn't find it. Right, he said softly. She grabbed her bag. I'm going to be late. The door closed before he could respond. Julian didn't follow her. He didn't check her location. He didn't demand answers. That wasn't who he was. But that didn't mean he wasn't changing. The silence between them grew structured. It had a pattern now, dinner conversations reduced to logistics. Did you pay the electricity bill? Yes. Are you home tomorrow night? Probably not. Okay, no arguments, no explosions, just the quiet erosion of something that once felt unbreakable. One night Julian stayed up later than usual. Evelyn had said she'd be home by 10. It was nearly midnight. He sat in the living room, laptop open but untouched, the soft hum of the city filtering through the windows. When the door finally opened, she walked in like she belonged somewhere else. "Hey," she said, slipping off her heels. "Hey," that was it. No explanation, no apology. Julian closed his laptop. Long night. "Yeah." Work. A pause, too brief to be honest, too long to be casual. "Yeah." Julian nodded. Then he asked the question he wasn't supposed to ask. "Are you happy?" Evelyn frowned slightly. What kind of question is that? A simple one. She let out a quiet breath, almost amused. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" Julian held her gaze. "Because you're not here," he thought. "Because you stopped being here a while ago." But he didn't say it. Instead he smiled. Just checking. That night sleep didn't come easily. For either of them. Evelyn lay on her side, back turned toward him, her phone lighting up intermittently in the dark. She thought he didn't notice. He did, every time. Julian stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying moments, small ones, insignificant on their own, but together forming something undeniable. The missed calls, the distant laughter, the way she no longer reached for him in her sleep. He could feel it now. The shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that scared him. He had two choices. He knew that. He could confront her, demand clarity, force the truth into the open, risk breaking whatever fragile version of them still existed. Or he could stay silent, preserve what remained, pretend that love, once strong enough, could survive distance without being named. Julian turned his head slightly, looking at Evelyn's silhouette in the dim light. He loved her. That wasn't the question. The question was, did she still love him? And more importantly, did she still choose him? The next morning, Julian made breakfast. Pancakes, coffee, fresh fruit. The kind of effort that used to mean something. Evelyn walked into the kitchen surprised. "What's this?" "Nothing," he said lightly. "Just felt like it." She sat down, taking a small bite. "It's good, I know." A faint smile, a familiar rhythm. For a moment it felt like before, but moments don't last. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Then again. Julian watched her, not the action, but the reaction. The slight change in her expression, the almost smile she tried to hide. "Work?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Julian took a sip of his coffee. He didn't press further, but something inside him settled. Not peacefully, but definitively. Later that day, as Evelyn left the apartment, Julian remained standing by the window, watching her walk down the street. Not because he didn't trust her, but because deep down he already knew. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud. That evening his phone lit up. A message from Evelyn, running late again. Julian stared at the screen, then he typed, "Okay." He didn't ask where, he didn't ask why, because the truth was he was no longer waiting for answers. He was waiting for confirmation. And somewhere in the quiet space between love and loss, Julian Hayes began to understand something he had been avoiding for weeks. Sometimes the hardest part isn't being betrayed, it's realizing the betrayal has already happened. Long before the truth is spoken. The truth didn't explode, it didn't arrive with shouting accusations or shattered glass. It came quietly, the way everything important in their relationship seemed to end. It was a Sunday, and that in itself felt unusual. Sundays used to belong to them: slow mornings, shared coffee, the soft rhythm of a life that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Now it felt like borrowed time. Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. Julian stood in the doorway, watching her, not suspiciously, not angrily, just carefully. "I thought we could go out today," he said. "Maybe brunch, somewhere quiet." She didn't look up. "I have plans." Julian paused. "Since when do you make Sunday plans without telling me?" She sighed, finally locking her phone. "Since my schedule stopped revolving around this apartment." The words were sharp but not loud, and somehow that made them worse. Julian stepped further into the room. "Evelyn, when did we become something you have to work around?" She stood up, grabbing her bag. "Can we not do this right now?" "Do what? This interrogation?" He let out a quiet breath. "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to understand what's happening to us." She turned to face him, then her expression tightening, not with guilt but with impatience. "Nothing is happening to us, Julian. Things are just evolving into what?" A pause. "Just long enough. Into something different." He could have stopped there. He should have. But something inside him, something that had been quietly breaking for weeks, finally refused to stay silent. "Is there someone else?" The question didn't echo. It didn't need to. It settled into the room like gravity. Evelyn didn't react immediately. No shock, no denial, no anger, just stillness. And in that stillness, Julian understood. Evelyn. Her name sounded different now. Not like something he belonged to, but something he was about to lose. She looked at him. And for a brief second something flickered in her eyes. Not remorse, not love, but conflict. I didn't plan for this, she said quietly. Julian nodded once. I didn't ask if you planned it. Another silence, thicker this time, more honest. Who is he? Her lips parted slightly. Does it matter? Yes. Why, Julian's voice remained steady. Because I deserve to know who I've been losing you to. She looked away, then back again. Adrian. The name landed softly, but it carried weight. The same name from the photo. The same name Julian had already begun to associate with something he couldn't yet define. Now he could. How long, he asked? Evelyn exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. Julian studied her face again, still searching, still hoping to find something, regret, hesitation, anything that might suggest this wasn't already decided. But what he saw instead was something far more final, certainty. Are you in love with him? The question felt heavier than the others. Evelyn hesitated this time, not long, but long enough. I think, she began, then stopped. Julian waited. I think I feel something different, she said instead. Different, not deeper, not better, just different. And somehow that was enough to break everything. Julian let out a quiet breath, his gaze drifting for just a moment before returning to her. And what does that mean for us? Evelyn swallowed. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even herself, she said, It means I can't keep pretending this is enough. The words echoed louder than any scream. Julian didn't move, didn't react, but something inside him shifted, not shattered, not yet, but loosened, like a foundation beginning to give way. I never asked you to pretend, he said quietly. I know. Then why does it sound like you're blaming me? I'm not blaming you, she replied, her voice tightening. I'm just being honest. Honest would have been telling me before it got this far. She flinched slightly, but only slightly. I didn't know how. Julian nodded slowly. That's interesting. What is, you didn't know how to tell me the truth, but you knew how to lie to me every day. The words landed clean, precise, no anger, just truth. Evelyn looked at him, then really looked. And for the first time something inside her wavered, not enough to change her decision, but enough to feel its weight. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. Julian gave a small, almost humorless smile. I believe you. A pause, but you did it anyway. Silence stretched between them again. This time it felt like the end of something, not abrupt, not chaotic, just complete. So what now? Julian asked. Evelyn tightened her grip on her bag. I'm going to see him. There it was. No ambiguity, no hesitation, just a choice, spoken out loud. Julian nodded once, slowly, deliberately, as in, today, yes. And after that Evelyn didn't answer immediately, but she didn't need to. The answer was already there. Julian stepped aside, clearing the space between her and the door. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just intentionally. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if waiting for something. A reaction, a plea, a reason to stay. But Julian gave her none of those things. He just stood there, calm, present, and suddenly distant. I didn't expect it to happen like this, she said quietly. Julian met her eyes one last time. Neither did I. A pause, then softer, but I think we both knew it was coming. Evelyn nodded, though her expression flickered with something she couldn't quite name. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt louder than it should have, more final, more irreversible. Just before she reached for the handle, Julian spoke again, not loudly, not desperately, but clearly. I hope he gives you everything you think I couldn't. Evelyn froze, her hand resting on the door. For a moment, just a moment, something inside her cracked. Not enough to stop, but enough to feel. Then she opened the door. The apartment was quiet again, but this time it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. Julian stood there for a long time after she left, not moving, not reacting, just existing in the space where something had ended. He didn't cry, not yet. Because the truth was, the pain hadn't fully arrived, not all at once. It would come later, in pieces, in memories, in the absence of things he used to take for granted. For now there was only one thing he understood with absolute clarity. She didn't choose Adrian, not really. She chose a version of herself that no longer included him. And Julian, for the first time since he met her, didn't try to change her mind. Because some choices, once made, don't need to be argued with. They only need to be accepted. The apartment felt different the next morning. Not emptier, not yet. Just rearranged in a way Julian couldn't quite explain. Like something invisible had been removed and everything else was still adjusting to its absence. He woke up at the same time, 6:30 a.m., out of habit. For a brief second, he forgot. He turned slightly instinctively, expecting to see Evelyn beside him, her hair scattered across the pillow. Her phone somewhere under the sheets, the faint rhythm of her breathing grounding the room. But there was nothing. Just an untouched space. Cold. Still. Final. Julian sat up slowly, running a hand over his face. No dramatic realization. No sudden breakdown, just awareness. She wasn't coming back. The coffee machine hummed as usual. He measured the grounds with the same precision, poured the water, waited for the familiar scent to fill the kitchen. Routine. That was the only thing holding the morning together. He poured 2 cups without thinking, then paused, stared at the second one, and quietly poured it down the sink. His phone buzzed. For a moment his chest tightened. But it wasn't Evelyn, just an email. Work. Life continuing indifferent to personal collapse. Julian sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing in particular. The silence wasn't heavy. Not yet. It was hollow. Like a space waiting to be filled, but no longer knowing with what. He didn't call her, didn't text, didn't check her social media because there was nothing left to confirm. She had already made her choice. And for the first time, Julian understood something clearly. Chasing her now wouldn't bring her back. It would only cost him what little dignity he had left. Around noon he started packing. Not everything, just what was his. Books, clothes, a few personal things that still felt like they belonged to him. He moved through the apartment calmly, deliberately touching objects not with nostalgia but with quiet recognition. This is where we laughed. This is where we argued. This is where I lost her. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. The memories were already leaving with him. In the bedroom he paused. Evelyn's side of the closet remained untouched, her dresses lined up perfectly, heels arranged with the same care she gave everything that mattered to her. Julian reached out briefly, his fingers brushing the fabric of one dress. The one she wore the night they celebrated her promotion. The night she told him, "I couldn't have done this without you." He pulled his hand back, not out of pain, but out of understanding. That version of her didn't exist anymore. He left the key on the kitchen counter, right next to the note she had once written him, "In case you didn't eat." He stared at it for a moment, then flipped it over, blank on the other side, fitting. As he stepped out of the apartment, Julian didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. The city felt different that day. Louder, sharper, more honest. People rushed past him, absorbed in their own lives, their own dramas, their own quiet disasters. No one noticed him, and for once Julian was grateful for that. He walked without a clear destination. Just movement, just distance. Each step putting space between him and something that had already ended. His phone buzzed again. This time it was her. Evelyn. He stopped walking, stared at the screen. Her name. Still familiar. Still dangerous. He didn't open it immediately. He didn't need to. He already knew what it would say, or at least what it wouldn't. No apology, no regret. Just something in between. Something that tried to soften the truth without changing it. Eventually he opened the message. "I think we should talk." Julian exhaled slowly. Of course, not to fix things, not to come back, just to talk, to ease the discomfort, to make it feel less final. His fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment, something inside him almost responded. Not hope, not love, just habit. The instinct to keep the connection alive. But then he remembered the way she said his name the day before, not with love, not with hesitation, but with distance, like he was already part of her past. Julian locked his phone and kept walking. Across the city, Evelyn sat in Adrian's apartment, glass walls, polished surfaces, a view that stretched endlessly across Manhattan. Everything she thought she wanted, everything she chose, and yet She kept checking her phone, waiting for a response that didn't come. Something wrong? Adrian asked, watching her from across the room. Evelyn shook her head, no, but her eyes betrayed her. Adrian studied her for a moment, then walked closer. You made the right choice, he said, his tone confident, reassuring. Evelyn nodded. I know, but the words didn't settle the way they should have. Because somewhere deep down she expected Julian to fight, to call, to show up, to give her a reason to doubt herself. But he didn't. And that silence, that absence of reaction unsettled her more than any argument ever could. Did he say anything? Adrian asked casually. Evelyn hesitated. No. Adrian smiled faintly. Then I guess that answers everything. Maybe it did, but not in the way he thought. Because Julian's silence wasn't indifference. It was something far more powerful. Acceptance. And for the first time since she walked away, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected. Not regret, not yet, but discomfort. A quiet, growing awareness that she might have misjudged something important. Meanwhile, Julian stopped at a small cafe. Nothing fancy, nothing curated. Just a place to sit, to exist, to begin again. He ordered coffee, sat by the window, watched the city move, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting for her. The pain would come. He knew that. In waves, in moments, in unexpected memories that refused to stay buried. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Something steady, something quiet, something that had survived. Himself. Julian took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze softening as the sunlight filtered through the glass. He had lost her. That much was true. But he hadn't lost everything, because in the end she walked away with someone else, and he walked away with his pride. Time didn't heal everything, it just rearranged the damage. 3 years later, Evelyn Carter stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a penthouse that overlooked the Hudson River. Everything was perfect, the lighting, the furniture, the silence, especially the silence. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored blazer, studying her reflection with the same critical eye she once used in boardrooms. Flawless, composed, untouchable, and yet something felt missing. Are you ready? Adrian's voice came from behind her, still smooth, still controlled, still carrying that same quiet authority that once drew her in like gravity. Evelyn met his gaze in the mirror. Yes, a beat. You're late, he added. She turned slightly. The event doesn't start for another 20 minutes. I don't like arriving after people. It wasn't said harshly, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Evelyn nodded, reaching for her coat. Let's go. The car ride was silent. Not awkward, not tense, just empty. The kind of silence that didn't invite conversation, only compliance. At the event, Evelyn smiled on cue. She shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, delivered perfectly crafted responses that revealed nothing real. You look incredible tonight, someone told her. Thank you, she replied automatically. You and Adrian are such a power couple. She smiled again. Of course they were. That's what she chose. Adrian stayed close, but not in the way Julian used to. Not grounding, not warm, just present. Like an extension of the image they had built together. You handled that well, Adrian said at one point, his voice low as they stepped aside. Evelyn glanced at him. Handled what? The investors? You said exactly what they needed to hear. She nodded faintly. That's my job. Adrian studied her for a moment. You're good at it. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like an evaluation. Later that night, back in the penthouse, Evelyn kicked off her heels and walked toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below her lights, flickering like distant memories she couldn't quite reach. Adrian poured himself a drink. You were quiet tonight, he said. I spoke when I needed to. That's not what I meant. Evelyn turned slightly. Then what did you mean? Adrian took a sip before answering. You used to be more alive at these things. She let out a soft, almost humorless laugh. Maybe I've just gotten better at not wasting energy. Adrian didn't smile. I didn't ask you to be efficient, he said. I asked you to be present. The words lingered longer than they should have, because somewhere deep down Evelyn knew she wasn't present. Not really. Not anymore. Do you ever think about it? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Adrian frowned slightly. Think about what? She hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing. He watched her for a moment, then looked away. That night Evelyn couldn't sleep. Again. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the city reflecting across the glass walls. Adrian was asleep beside her, peaceful, unaffected. Her phone rested on the nightstand, silent, empty, no messages she cared about, no one she was waiting for. And yet, her mind drifted, not to Adrian, not to work, but to something quieter, something simpler, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cedarwood, a handwritten note beside a plate of untouched food, a voice that never demanded but always stayed. Julian. Evelyn closed her eyes tightly, as if that could push the memory away, but it didn't. It never did. You're overthinking again? Adrian's voice cut through the silence. She turned her head slightly. I thought you were asleep. I was. He shifted beside her, propping himself up on one elbow. What's going on with you? Evelyn hesitated. The honest answer sat right there. Heavy, uncomfortable, dangerous. I don't know, she admitted. Adrian studied her, his expression sharpening. That's not an answer I like. She exhaled slowly. I'm just tired. From what she almost said everything. Instead she said, work. Adrian nodded once. Then take a break. It's not that simple. It always is, he replied. You just make it complicated. Evelyn looked at him, then really looked. And for the first time she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Not strength, not certainty, but control. You don't like uncertainty, do you? She asked quietly. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. No. Why? Because it leads to mistakes. Evelyn swallowed. A strange feeling crept in. Not fear, but realization. And what if a mistake already happened, she asked. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Then you don't dwell on it, he said. You move forward. Forward, always forward, never back, never inward. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if she understood, as if she agreed. But something inside her didn't. The next morning she stood in front of the mirror again. Same reflection, same perfection, same emptiness. She touched her own face lightly as if trying to recognize the woman staring back at her. 3 years ago she thought she was choosing more excitement, more ambition, more life. Now she wasn't sure what she had gained, only what she had lost. Not just Julian, but something else, something harder to name, herself. Later that day, while scrolling through old files on her laptop, she came across something unexpected. A photo. Taken years ago. It was simple, no filters, no audience. Just her and Julian, standing in their kitchen, laughing at something she couldn't remember. She stared at it for a long time, longer than she should have. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter felt something she had been avoiding. Not dissatisfaction, not confusion, regret. Not loud, not overwhelming, but quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. Because the truth was, success had given her everything she thought she wanted. Except the one thing she didn't realize she needed. Something real. Something she couldn't replace. Someone she couldn't get back. She didn't expect it to happen like that. No dramatic build-up, no carefully planned encounter, no warning. Just a street, a crossing light, and a version of the past, standing still while everything else moved. Evelyn had left the office early that day. Not because she had less work, but because she couldn't focus. The numbers blurred, conversations felt distant, and every decision seemed heavier than it should have been. So she walked. No destination, just movement, just space. That's when she saw him. Across the street. Standing outside a small cafe, nothing like the places she used to go. No polished glass, no curated aesthetic, just warm, light wooden chairs and something real. Julian. He looked different. Not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that held it. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, his presence grounded. There was no trace of the man who used to wait, no tension, no quiet longing. He wasn't looking for her. That was the first thing she noticed. Evelyn stopped walking. The city rushed around her, car's voices, footsteps, but everything felt distant, muted. Because for the first time in years she was looking at something she couldn't control. Julian glanced up and saw her. There was no shock in his expression, no visible reaction, just recognition. The light changed. People started crossing. Evelyn didn't remember deciding to move, but suddenly she was walking toward him, each step heavier than the last. When she reached him, neither of them spoke immediately. They just stood there. Two versions of a story that had already ended. Hi. Her voice was softer than she expected. Julian nodded slightly. Hi, Evelyn. He still said her name the same way, calm, measured, without ownership. You look... She began, then stopped. Different, better, untouchable. Well... Julian gave a small nod. I am. No hesitation, no modesty, just truth. Evelyn swallowed. I didn't expect to see you here. I work nearby, he said. You same. A pause. The kind that used to feel comfortable. Now it felt fragile. Julian gestured lightly toward the cafe. Do you want to sit? The invitation surprised her. Not because he offered, but because it felt so neutral, not loaded, not emotional, just polite. She nodded. Okay. Inside, the cafe was quiet, warm. The scent of coffee filled the air, familiar in a way that made something inside her tighten unexpectedly. They sat across from each other, not too close, not too far. So Evelyn said, wrapping her hands around the cup she hadn't touched. How have you been? Julian leaned back slightly. Good. That's it. He smiled faintly. That's enough. She studied him, trying to find something. A trace, a crack. Anything that suggested he hadn't moved on as completely as he seemed. I heard you've been doing well, she said. Work's been steady. More than steady, she added. You designed that project in Brooklyn, didn't you? Julian nodded. Yeah. It's impressive. Thank you. Again, no overreaction. No attempt to impress her. No need. Evelyn looked down at her cup, then back at him. You seem different. Julian tilted his head slightly. People usually are after a few years. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She hesitated. Because the truth felt heavier now, more complicated. You seem at peace, she said finally. Julian didn't answer immediately. He considered it, then nodded. I am. The simplicity of it unsettled her. Because peace wasn't something Adrian ever talked about. Only progress, only forward. That's good, she said quietly. It is. Another pause, but this one felt different, not empty, just honest. Evelyn took a breath. There's something I've wanted to say. Julian didn't stop her, didn't encourage her either, he just waited. I didn't handle things well, she said. An understatement. But it was the closest she could get. Julian nodded once. No. No anger, no sarcasm. Just agreement. I thought I knew what I wanted, she continued. I thought I needed more. And did you get it? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Not because of what it asked, but because of how calmly it was delivered. Evelyn looked away briefly, then back at him. I got something different. Julian's expression didn't change. Is it enough? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because for the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. I don't know, she admitted. Julian studied her for a moment. Not judging, not analyzing, just seeing. That sounds familiar, he said quietly. The words landed deeper than she expected, because she remembered saying the same thing once. About him. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. I think about you sometimes. There, it was out. Raw, unfiltered. Julian didn't react immediately, but something in his gaze softened. Not with longing, but with understanding. I figured, he said. That hurt more than it should have. Because it meant he had already accepted that part of the story, without needing her to say it. I made a mistake, she added. The words came easier now, but they felt heavier. Julian shook his head slightly. No. Evelyn frowned. No, you made a choice. The distinction was subtle, but it changed everything. And some choices, he continued, his voice steady, don't come with do-overs. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt final. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. This was the man she once had. The one who stayed, the one who didn't demand, the one who loved her without making it feel like a transaction. And now he was everything she once needed, just no longer hers. I didn't realize what I had, she said softly. Julian nodded. I know. No bitterness, no satisfaction, just truth. Evelyn felt something rise in her chest, something sharp, something undeniable. Do you ever think about us? She asked. Julian smiled faintly. Sometimes. Her breath caught slightly, and he looked at her, calm, grounded, free. And I'm grateful for what it taught me. That was it. Not regret, not longing, not hope. Gratitude. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if accepting something she couldn't change. Outside, the city continued moving, unaware, unchanged. Inside, something closed, quietly, completely. Because in that moment, Evelyn Carter understood a truth she had spent years avoiding. She didn't just lose him. She lost him at the exact moment he became the man she had always needed. And now, he no longer needed her. The message took her 3 days to send. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she finally understood that no version of it would change anything. Evelyn sat alone in the penthouse, the city stretched beneath her like a life she no longer felt connected to. The silence was familiar now, not sharp, not suffocating, just constant. Her phone rested in her hand, the screen glowing softly in the dim light. Julian's name. Still there, unchanged, unlike everything else. She typed, deleted, typed again, paused. Can we talk? Number 2 vague, too easy. I'm sorry. She stared at the words. They felt small, insufficient. Years too late. Finally, she exhaled and typed the only thing that felt honest. I don't expect anything. I just needed to say thank you for who you were to me. She read it once, twice, then pressed send. The message didn't feel like hope. It felt like release. Julian received it later that evening. He was sitting in the same cafe Evelyn had found him in days earlier, a notebook open in front of him, sketches scattered across the table. The air smelled like coffee and something warm, something steady. He glanced at his phone, saw her name, and for a brief moment time folded in on itself. Not painfully, not intensely, just quietly. He opened the message, read it once, then set the phone down. He didn't respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because he didn't feel the need to. That was new. Years ago, a message from Evelyn would have meant everything. Now it was just part of a story that had already ended. Still, he didn't ignore it, because ignoring wasn't who he had become. That night he walked home slower than usual, not thinking about what to say, but understanding why it mattered that he said something at all. Back in his apartment, smaller, simpler, but entirely his. Julian sat by the window, the city lights reflecting softly against the glass. He picked up his phone and replied, "You don't have to thank me. I meant everything I did." A pause. Then he added, "I hope you find what you're looking for." He read it once. No bitterness, no hidden meaning, just truth. Then he sent it. Across the city, Evelyn's phone lit up. She didn't check it right away. She had learned not to rush toward things that might hurt. But eventually she looked. She read his message slowly. Every word, every space between them. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to reply. Because she understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. Evelyn set her phone down gently, then walked toward the window, mirroring the same quiet posture Julian held miles away. The city looked the same. It always did. Bright, endless, full of possibility. But something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to see clearly. She had spent years chasing something more. More excitement, more ambition, more intensity. And in doing so, she had let go of something rare, something steady, something real. Julian. Not perfect. Not extraordinary in the ways the world celebrated. But real in the ways that mattered. And now he was gone. Not physically, but in every way that counted. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the feeling, but to accept it. Regret didn't arrive like a storm. It settled in slowly, quietly, like a shadow that followed her without asking. And maybe that was its purpose. Not to punish, but to remind that some choices don't echo loudly, they linger. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life continued, as it always does. Evelyn kept working, kept attending events, kept playing the role she had built so carefully. But something had changed. She smiled less. Not because she was unhappy, but because she no longer confused movement with meaning. And sometimes, in quiet moments, she couldn't avoid she thought of him. Not with longing, not with hope, but with understanding. Meanwhile, Julian moved forward. Not perfectly, not without scars, but freely. He built something new, not just in his work, but in himself. He learned to speak when it mattered, to walk away when it didn't, to recognize the difference between love and attachment. And most importantly, he learned that losing someone doesn't always mean losing yourself. One evening, as he stood once again outside the cafe, watching the city breathe around him, Julian allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Not because everything had worked out, but because he had. He had survived it, learned from it, let it go. And in doing so, he became someone stronger than the man who once stood in a quiet apartment, waiting for a love that had already left. Back in her penthouse, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror one last time that night. Same reflection, same perfection, but now she saw it differently. Not as something complete, but as something so incomplete. And maybe that was the truth she needed to live with. Because in the end, she walked away with what she thought she wanted. And he walked away with something far more valuable. Peace, not loud, not visible, but real. And sometimes that's the only thing that truly remains.